There's something happening here.
Yeah, something is happening here, and what it is ain't exactly clear. And Retake Our Democracy and its blog and in this radio show tries to shed light on what's happening and what you can do about it. Hi, I'm Paul Gibson from Retake Our Democracy, and I'm the host of Retake Our Democracy. It airs every Saturday morning at 8:30 a.m. It's a 30-minute show on KSFR 101.1 FM, your Santa Fe public radio station. And I'm the host, and today I'm going solo as our scheduled guest's internet was down and we couldn't record the show. It's about time for a solo show anyway, because I'm feeling that the troops need a little bit of a pep talk. And so today I'm sending a message of hope, of signs of a kind of awakening across the globe, and of promising prospects for the 2020 election and how you can really meaningfully get involved. I'll also lay out some new initiatives in which Retake is involved. But mostly, I just want to use today to encourage you to get involved in the 2020 election. It's an of existential import, and now is the time to get involved. Last week, I spoke with New Mexico State Representative Melanie Stansberry, and most of the show focused on all things water, a specialty for Representative Stansberry. It was an interesting show with one of the most stunning takeaways was the extraordinary degree to which actually legally New Mexico simply can't manage its own water. I mean, who knew? So if you want to hear more on that, go to retakeourdemocracy.org and hover over the actions and events menu on the homepage and click on Retake Conversations, and you'll find all of our old shows going back to April 25th of this year. For older shows, you'll have to go to KSFR, click on the programs menu, go to the podcasts, and then scroll to Retake Our Democracy, where we have literally 150 of our shows there. And if you're driving around town today and you don't catch all of today's show, the recording will be on our website by mid-morning on Saturday. We're skipping the Zoominar for August 18th, as we've been working furiously to expand our election strategy. And that, my friends, is the focus of today's show. But first, I need to set the stage with some comments on what we are all going through right now and how it could and should motivate us to action. The themes I'll be discussing today have all been covered in one form or another in Retake Our Democracy's recent blog posts, mostly in the last 10 days. Beginning with my report of my own personal meltdown about a week and a half ago, with my recognition of just, sometimes these things just come to you out of nowhere, and maybe you're experiencing it too, but I've suddenly just had this feeling of how powerless and constrained I feel, which led me to think of how so many others far less privileged than Roxanne and I, and just the horrible mess they're in. This led to conversation with many others who shared that sense of hopelessness and despair, and also had some ideas about trying to deal with it. I refused to take my focus off of this, though, and I and others were feeling. And as a result, a kind of strange transformation occurred as a path to hope kind of emerged out of the sadness, really. So today's show, I'll take you along on that journey from despair and hopelessness to optimism and a sense of power and control. So it all sort of started when I was sitting around thinking, and Roxanne was in Arizona dealing with her mom's passing. And I was thinking about our kids. And we have 3 kids, and the oldest one is Joanna, and she's in her 3rd year of med school. And this isn't a great time to be doing rotations, which is what she'll be doing for this year, and she's already started. And so she's going to be in high-risk environments, pretty much all the time. And that's a concern, obviously, for a parent. Of course, there are thousands, millions of other medical personnel who are in the same boat, but Joanna's our daughter. And then our next oldest is Josh, and he lives in Cleveland with his new wife, Holly, and they have a little baby who is approaching a year old, just a few months away, Tori, and that's our first grandchild, and Roxanne still hasn't seen him. I, on a lark, went to see them in October before the COVID struck, and so I've seen him, but you know, I would be back. We would have seen him a couple of times more since then, if it weren't for this. And then our third kid is Jesse, and he's younger. He's just like 26, and you know, he's been traveling around the world a lot, but his career, he was just starting to really find his niche, and it was a niche in doing organizing volunteers for large festivals, international festivals. And he was developing quite a small little business about it. And in the course of that, met a woman who they sort of fell in love. And that relationship was just starting to percolate. But she lives in France. And Americans can't travel to France. And when you have a career that's predicated on large gatherings of festivals, that's obviously on pause. And so when I started thinking about this, that just led to, okay, there's 3 kids. There are kids. They're relatively privileged compared to many other people. And that led me to thinking about, those other people. And one of the most, as I did that, I looked into this article, I believe it was in the Washington Post, but it focused on 3 young adults. Well, 2 of them were young adults. One was an older man, veteran. And their lives were just economically devastated, completely and utterly devastated. And they lived in Washington, D.C. One single mom was on the verge of homelessness, and she was 8 months pregnant with her second child. It was just, as I read that, and in that story, there was one photo in particular of one of the people that was the focus of the article. I can't remember his name now. He had such a lost look on his face. And it just made me realize how many of us are feeling that way, and how there doesn't seem to be any sense of, progress. I mean, we have a lunatic in the White House, and that's frightening, and and then I thought about something else, and that is that I read a lot of blogs online, articles from the Washington Post, the New York Times, in order to prepare the blog for Retake. And I can hardly remember an article on the climate crisis. It has just been pushed out of the news. It has fallen from our attention. It's still getting warmer, and the seas are still rising. And so the extent to which that has been eclipsed as even a concern is terrifying. So all of this kind of coalesced, and I just completely fell apart, crying and stuff. And it took a day to really kind of come back out of it. I wound up having conversations with people I wrote a blog about it, and people called and wrote, and we talked. And I found that from those conversations, I certainly wasn't alone. There were a lot of other people feeling this way. And there was a lot of gratitude, a lot of written comments on the blog, saying, yes, thank you for sharing this, and so forth. And yes, I feel this way. And so over a period of about 24 hours, I shifted my focus, and I started thinking about the Black Lives Matter movement. And I wrote a blog also about class justice in the United States. We've had a good deal of attention of late on two major social movements, and that's the Black Lives Matter movement, and then less overtly one on class justice. The issue of class justice is surfacing really because of our increasing awareness of the importance of essential workers, who for the most part are blue collar workers who are the victims of COVID. And a national policy has been unfolded by our despicable president that is essentially shutting off emergency relief for those who face the choice of going to work or risking their lives or the lives of their family members. And, when you look at how Europe handled this pandemic, they shut things down. They didn't allow people to go to work, but they provided them with their income. And that's how Italy and France and Spain and England to a lesser degree sort of turned it around. And yes, there was an economic hit, but it was relatively brief. And people went back to work, and they're going to sporting events, and they're going to family gatherings. And, they've more or less got the COVID, at least for now, under control. But, Trump is really engaged in a brazen effort to force America back to work and to force children back to school. But from much that I've read of late, the pure crassness of these actions have thrown into bold relief just how limitless the greed of the capitalist machine can be. The term essential worker has a nice ring to it, but to capitalist CEOs, those essential workers are just replaceable cogs in the wheels for their profit, And I think people are starting to connect the dots. So I wrote a blog about that. I found an article, I believe it was in the Atlantic or Vanity Fair. I think it was Vanity Fair. And it traced 90 years of the political history of the Democratic Party and its relationship to labor. And I'm going to talk about that in a minute, but I want to return to the BLM, the Black Lives Matter movement, because what we're seeing is protests all across the world, really. Most of them peaceful, but not all of them. Some of them are reasonably violent, urban kind of rampages. But they're expressions of just outrage and anger. And like, we've been through this movie too many times. And the important thing is that they were sustained for weeks. And so I'm sort of sensing that these two kinds of justice are emerging sort of simultaneously, our thirsts for justice, for the essential workers and for Black Lives Matter, and by extension for indigenous peoples and immigrants and so forth. And people are connecting the dots. And, when you think back on the history of the labor movement in the United States, there was a time like the New Deal where labor was central to Democratic policy. I mean, it was the Democratic Party was the New Deal. And, not long after that, in the 60s, the Democratic Party began a retreat from that. And I was reading in this article, Gary Hart actually was running for Senate from Colorado, and he had been the campaign manager for George McGovern. And his slogan for his campaign was, it's time to turn from the New Deal. That was a Democrat. And over the next 30, 40, 50 years, we have seen the Democratic Party really retreat from its support for the labor movement. And because of it, that labor movement has moved over, and the working class Americans are voting Republican. And who can blame them? And so but now, after I finished that article, I had a kind. I was really feeling like a kind of clarity was coming to me, and it set a stage for a shift. All of what I've said thus far really reflected a thought process through which I traveled over a week or about a week. And I was not feeling terribly upbeat until I started realizing that there was real power in connecting these dots and that there are signs that power is being flexed on both sides of the Atlantic. In another post from Retake last week, we examined how there are radical rumblings on both sides of the Atlantic, signs that despite national governments that range from moderate to extremely conservative, grassroots organizing is really leading to important election wins, mostly local, that have translated into implementation of a wide range of economic and social justice policies that are really transforming some cities in Europe. The article really pointed to two in particular in Barcelona and Paris, where elections of progressive mayors and councils, and progressive doesn't really characterize it, it's more progressive than progressive. But they're developing affordable housing programs, they're addressing gentrification, they're launching all kinds of innovative food initiatives to preserve food security. And then the same article talked about in Northwest England, where in the heart of Brexit, in a newly elected leftist council in the small town of Preston, which is in Northwest England, they're investing in the development of worker-owned co-ops and farm-to-school lunch chains, food chains. And when you read about this, you realize that elections actually matter. Here in the US, we are seeing stunning election wins by not just liberal-leaning US House candidates, but leftist activists. In New York, two more 10 to 15-term dinos have been ousted by young leftists, and these are leftists of color, one of whom is gay, but they're young and they're fed up. And we've seen similar wins by challengers of incumbent Democrats in Michigan, in Pennsylvania, Virginia, Georgia, and even in bright red Missouri, where a Black Lives Matter founder was elected to become the first woman African-American elected to the House from Missouri in, I think it was 50 or 60 years. And all of these insurrections have been led by leftist grassroots coalitions who are sending a really clear message to the Democratic Party and to its leadership that leadership is not really listening just yet to our growing, to the power that's growing and to the demands of those that they represent, those new representatives represent. So I want to take a break for just a quick second here to remind our listeners that it is in times like these that KSFR is more important than ever. It offers timely news and alerts and a wide range of programming to keep you sane while you're holed up at home. So for those of you who can afford it, please consider making a contribution and think of it as your ticket for admission to a wealth of really good programming. So just go to ksfr.org and click on the donate button. Just remind you, our listeners who are driving around now, I'm doing a solo show that began with a rather depressing tour of how COVID is impacting my life, the life of my family, and far more oppressively, the lives of those who are far more economically and socially vulnerable. We then shifted gears a bit and began talking about some grassroots movements in Europe primarily and in New York and the US that were where grassroots groups were coalescing as coalitions and winning some really important elections and electing some serious young people of color in positions of power. And they're starting to flex their muscles. Well, I want to now turn our attention to New Mexico and then to you. In New Mexico, we've experienced the same kind of coalescence of grassroots organizations. Since 2016, a coalition led by Working Families Party and OLE, and aligned with groups like Nasty Women, Taoist United, Indivisible, Progressive Democrats of America, Adelante, and Retake Our Democracy, have all been working together in a loose coalition on election politics and focused on the state legislature, and installing a Democratic governor. And you know, when you look at what happened in the primary just this last June, we removed 5 really powerful Democratic senators who were, frankly, Democrats in name only. And that's pretty impressive. In 2018, we more or less reshaped the entire Democratic caucus in the House with an infusion of, a lot of them graduates of the Emerge program, the training program that trains women to run for office. That's making a big difference in our legislature. And yeah, there's still more work to be done here in New Mexico, and I'm going to be talking to you a little bit about how you can do some of that work in this current election. It's still impressive what's been accomplished already. And so in this context, Retake has been working for weeks to develop a range of strategies to impact not just the New Mexico state election, but the national election. We have 3 pages now up on our website under the elections menu. And one of them is focused on our 6 priority races in the state Senate, state legislative races. And it gives you tools and contact information and how to get involved and so forth. Another is on national elections and how you can get involved and vote forward and swing left and make calls and, you know, do things and send postcards and personal letters and things like that, encouraging people to register and encouraging people to vote. And so from reflecting back on the grassroots developments in all across the country, it occurred to me that you know, it's just about impossible to overstate the importance of this November election. And while we have those 2 pages up for how you can get involved in that election, one of our supporters came to us and suggested a really clever strategy. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about it. You know, again, I want to emphasize that, you know, Retake Our Democracy has been working in New Mexico for 4 years. And the entire purpose of what we're trying to do is to educate, motivate, and make it easy for you to take action. And so with such an important election coming, I want to tell you about a simple 4-part get out the vote strategy that we developed and is now available on our website. The success depends on how many of you faithfully execute at least the first 3 steps. You can accomplish the first 2 steps of this strategy in about 5 minutes. The third involves likely an hour, but has immense potential for an exponential impact on the election. The 4th is for users of social media and requires just a few minutes. But when done, you will have reached hundreds of people who will then reach hundreds more, because the whole basis of this strategy is predicated on basically a chain letter kind of approach. And no, you're not going to, you know, send $10 to the person at the top of the list and then hope that that chain letter keeps going and going and going, and you ultimately start getting checks from everybody. No, that's not what we're doing. There's no checks involved. There's also no phone calling involved. There's no texting involved. There's no writing letters. There's no trying to convince anybody to vote or anything. So this is what we're asking you to do. The first thing is we want you to verify that you're still registered to vote. And millions of voters have been purged from the voter rolls, and they don't know it. And we don't want them to show up on election day and find out that they can't vote. So everyone should verify that they are still registered. And for New Mexico, in our strategy page, we've provided New Mexicans with a link where they can go and verify in like a minute their registration that it's current. And for those outside New Mexico, we have a link to get to the National Secretary of State's website, where you can find your state and click on that and confirm your registration. So that's the first step. The second step is to make a plan to use early voting to vote in person as early as possible. If your state doesn't allow early voting, you need to vote by mail as early as possible. There are now estimates out there that if you don't vote by October 23rd, send in your ballot by October 23rd, it may not get processed. And it isn't as if many of you are undecided and need more time. So you got to get it done early and ease the pain for the US Postal Service. Each state will be different. So on this page, we have provided a link where you can get information on the policies for early voting in every state. The next step is the key. Tell everyone you know to vote, vote, vote. This is the most important step by far. You start by combing through your personal email address book, and then you send a note. And we've provided a note for you on this page, and suggest that you send that note to 100 people, 150 people. James Stewart, who's not the deceased actor, but a local Retake supporter, gave us this idea, and he kicked it off with writing to 150 of his friends. So think big. Then the fourth strategy is to use social media to share this page. Use a Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, or any social media platform to post a link to this page and add a personal message about how you think this is so important. Everyone needs to vote. And if everyone votes, we are going to win. If you use Facebook, also tag up to 50 friends. You can't do more than that or they'll boot you out. And ask everyone reading the post to share it with their friends on their Facebook feed. So that's our strategy. I'm recording this show on Friday afternoon, and barely after 24 hours, over 100 people have begun implementing this strategy. And later on Friday, I'll be posting links on web pages for about 30 indivisibles throughout the state of New Mexico. So we've got our work to do. That's our strategy. I would strongly encourage you to take action. This is a strategy that could have a significant impact if it goes viral. And the degree to which it does depends entirely on you. So go to retakeourdemocracy.org, hover over the election menu, and click on 4-step get out the vote strategy, and just do it. And keep coming back to that page as we have 2 more strategies we're going to launch over the next week. To give you an idea how important it is that we all are engaged, think about this. Over the past 5 months, we have all been so consumed by COVID and Trump, we can't even think about climate crisis. We simply must achieve a massive win in November so that on January 20th, we can regain our hope and our energy, and we can beat this COVID beast with sensible leadership. And then we can turn our attention to the climate crisis, the Green New Deal, racial justice, a failed healthcare system, and our failed relationship with labor. We have to take care of our essential workers. So that's it for today. I'm Paul Gibson, host of Retake Our Democracy. I'll be back next week with an actual guest. But until then, stay engaged and active. It's the only way we fix this mess. Thank you.